The protagonist of this story finally confesses his feelings to the villainess, only to be literally whipped into a bloody mess and mocked by everyone. She does not hesitate to curse his incompetence, flaunting the vast differences in their status. Some are born noble, while others, like him, are destined to remain lowly. But then, she crosses a line, one that shatters his restraint. That was the breaking point. Something inside him snaps. 10 years later, at the villainess's estate. Inside, a maid and the butler were fooling around. The butler wanted to clap them cheeks despite her refusal and warnings about their mistress. Now, he proceeded with foreplay, and she pleaded for him to take it easy. After all, they couldn't just do this in the hallway. But the guy was too excited to listen, even noting that she seemed like the mistress, while she called him a pervert. That's the reason he got so turned on. He wished for a day when her arrogant attitude would backfire. Speaking of which, the villainess appeared, slamming the door with a loud thud. Both of them froze at the sight of the villainess. The narrator then formally introduced her as Evelyn Winter, the head of the Winter family estate. With that out of the way, the story switches to outside the estate. Both the maid and the butler desperately pleaded for mercy, promising never to do it again. Normally, something like this would get someone dismissed or fired, but Evelyn just scoffed at the idea. Inside a box, a gun was revealed. With a cold, chilling aura, she presented two options: either die at her hands, or freeze slowly to death. Both were frightened beyond their wits. The butler reminded her about her title, saying that doing this would definitely leave a stain on her reputation. However, she didn't react, and her personal butler also understood the assignment. With that, he slowly approached the fool who begged for his help. But he just silenced him with a sharp kick to the chest. That sent him tumbling down the stairs. The next moment, Evelyn spoke. She was grateful that the butler worried about her reputation, so if he wanted to maintain it, he should happily die. They shouldn't worry, she intended to bury them in a gold casket together. Hearing this, they swore a time would come when her reputation couldn't help her. With that said, she ended the conversation, sending them together to another life. After a moment of silence, she handed the gun to her personal butler Joseph. She didn't like the gun. The accuracy was off, so he agreed to pay special attention and inform the workers. While leaving, Joseph voiced his concern, noting it was winter, so delivery might be slow, which caused her to reprimand him for thinking like a child. She suggested he tip the workers to get the work done faster. She hadn't gone far before something caught her attention. A maid tried to stop the little girl from hearing noises outside. She immediately apologized to Evelyn, explaining it was the recent noise that startled her daughter. So Evelyn apologized and made an excuse that the sounds meant to scared wolves. She headed inside with her daughter, asking about her well-being and what she was holding. She showed her a drawing of a flower, which was impossible to be from their region, concluding she might have copied it from books, and the daughter nodded in affirmation. Evelyn is momentarily taken aback. She recalls the very first moment someone had offered her a flower. He went on to explain the great deal and effort he took to make it. And if she didn't like it, she could just toss it into the trash. It turned out to be our protagonist. Now, he was shocked as she complimented the flower. It was a bit bad that the flower had no scent since it was crafted. This caused him to hesitate as his mind raced. Regardless, he lowered his head and promised to get her a real flower someday. At the end, she remembered the brutal scene and what she did to him. Back to the present, she suggested her daughter Sherry should make it blue next time. However, midway through their conversation, suddenly another servant burst through the door, panting and exclaiming that they were in trouble. Calmly, she asked about it, and the servant reported that their goods that were meant to sail to the northern region were all seized. We see literal shock on her face as the man continued. The people involved were the military, and they were obligated to root out ruthless nobles like her, making her furiously demand an explanation. Speaking of the devil, the man in charge just arrived at the Winter estate. While approaching, the servant noted his name was Jyleth Black. He was once a soldier but recently was titled the hero of the country after his crushing victories on the battlefield. Based on the situation, It seems Evelyn's goods were seen as supplies to arm the enemy, and her goods were weapons. Sorry if I forgot to mention that. Regardless, he warned them to be careful because the colonel was no different from the devil. Later, we see Colonel Gileth Black standing in front of the manor. Letting out a pop from his crack, he ordered his men not to drag her out. He would be heading inside to greet her out of courtesy. However, his men stormed into the mansion, pointing their rifles at Evelyn and her workers since she was a suspect of supporting the enemy. Meanwhile, the colonel apologized for the rudeness of his men. He humbly called himself a low-born soldier, basically, a commoner. At the same time, Evelyn was utterly bewildered seeing him. As he continued speaking, memories of the past flooded her mind. Gileth, feeling humiliated and bleeding, struggled to speak at first. But she just looked down at him with clear disgust. With gritted teeth, he vowed to make her regret it for the rest of her life. We can all imagine she gave our boy a purpose, literally carving the path for him to become the devil. Now she was shaken, asking what right he had to badge in. Well, he didn't respond to this. Now, all dignified and composed, he apologized for the wrongful addressing her. After all, she was now the head of the family. Later, an inspection was carried out under royal decree. The House of Winter is suspected of colluding with the nation's enemy by smuggling military supplies. So, everyone part of the family must cooperate with the investigation in order to uncover the truth. Disobedience will be treated as treason. Normally, the servants are worried since they don't know anything and have no role in family affairs. Evelyn instantly orders silence with her cane. She calls them out for making a fuss. As workers of her house, she wants them to act accordingly. She leaves while ordering the maid to fetch her tea. She senses someone watching. It's our boy, casually waiting for her upstairs. However, before the story proceeds, we get a brief about the monarchy of Altaric. Looking at a map, it's noticeable that the country is surrounded by powerful neighbors. Although they have survived countless threats thanks to their royal army, the suffering of the people began to worsen because of these threats and warfare. The Industrial Revolution also affected social classes, resulting in growing complaints against the royal and noble families. Against this backdrop, that's when our protagonist shows up on the scene. People call him different names like the man from an unknown origin, the Black Beast, the Hound of the Battlefield. To him, none of these names or what people think of him matters. He constantly grabs victory and turned from a commoner to a war hero. Now, he is seen as the hope of the people and Altaric's future. Anyway, back to the story. Gileath asks Evelyn about her husband, Lowen Winter. At first, she feigns ignorance. So, he repeats his question, specifically about Lowen's whereabouts. Evelyn replies sharply, calling him illiterate, and wondering aloud how he became a war hero. His subordinate doesn't like this, but he remains unfazed and continues. He understands Lowen Winter is dead on paper, but he couldn't find his body. Evelyn is shocked and asks if he violated her husband's grave. He calmly affirms, admitting it was wrong, but given the circumstances, his death was too suspicious. They got married 10 years ago, and he died in a train accident 3 years later. However, something didn't add up. Strangely, there were no witnesses to the accident, nor was his body found. What's interesting is that her assets only grew and didn't match what had been reported for the past 7 years after his death. Considering all these factors, he asks directly if her husband is committing treason under the disguise of death. At first, she is awestruck by his detailed analysis, before bursting out laughing like she heard the joke of the century. She thinks he should have become a writer rather than a soldier. Still, Black is cool as ever. He asks why she hasn't remarried in the past 7 years. In response, she says she loved her husband. Well, he didn't expect this response, so she repeats her previous statement. Our protagonist finds it intriguing. He can't imagine how a villainess could be in love. Now he believes she should be the writer. In response to this, she spills tea on him, noting she didn't find his joke funny. His subordinate instantly becomes alarmed. But Evelyn continues. She doesn't feel the least bit intimidated if he marched in with his soldiers just to blackmail her. Also, she advises him not to insult her husband, suggesting he bring proper evidence. With that said, she excuses herself, not forgetting to tell them to get out of her mansion. Later, while heading upstairs, she is surprised to spot her daughter. The little one begins trembling like she sees a ghost. More so, it's our protagonist with a bone-chilling aura. Suddenly, he calls for Evelyn's attention. Apparently, he almost forgot to mention a crucial piece of information before. However, she isn't interested, but he reassures her it's worth it. He doesn't understand yet, but the weapons being transported to their enemy had her house's seal. Now he drops the bomb. Basically, he is only doing her a favor by investigating her husband, and if she fails to prove her innocence, she could be sentenced to death. Hearing this, she struggles to maintain her composure. Now, she places her cane on his chest. She suggests he cries and begs like before. Who knows, she might actually consider it just for old time's sake. It's really bad that her arrogance makes her not understand the gravity of the situation. In a swift motion, he pulls her cane forward, also catching her in the process. He reminds her that she has a child now. With that, he gives his last words, advising her to be careful. Before departing, he announces his departure, hoping to see her the next day. Our boy manages to riz her at this point. Not a bad move though. Next, we learn about the House of Winter, a founding contributor to the Altaric nation and one of the most loyal subjects to the royal family. For this merit, the family was given the northern part of the kingdom, resulting in enormous wealth from mining and the weapons industry. However, the Winters were blinded by wealth, using any means, even underhanded tricks, to expand their business. In other words, their reputation was terrible. So, in order to repair their reputation and restore honor, the previous head arranged a marriage with Loan, the top graduate of the Imperial Academy. In the end, Loan died, leaving the family affairs to Evelyn. Well, instead of feeling grief over losing her husband, she continued ruling the family business using the previous methods. Owning her different title as the heartless widow and cold villainess, she didn't care much about how others saw her. But nothing in life lasts forever, and the family business began declining. Without a legitimate family heir, the Winter family faced significant damage. Let's shift to the next day. The atmosphere is tense because of Gileath Black's proposal. He offers her a paper, insisting she sell her domain to him, in other words, transfer her title to him. He reasons that it would be better for her to willingly retire her duties and live well, rather than forfeiting it to the royal family. In response, she boldly declines the offer, saying she isn't penniless. He replies sharply, pointing out her poor reputation, not to mention her mining profits have declined. As long as they are seen as treasonous smugglers, she'll find it extremely difficult to make future profits. He slides the ownership document toward her. Basically, he is doing all this for her best interest. Looking at the document, she reflects and realizes he has someone backing him. He doesn't deny it, and he's not someone she can confront. This dramatic scene makes her ask if he really cares for her. However, Gileath just tells her to sign the damn thing already. In response, she declines, insisting only the king can grant her such mercy, and since he is not above the king, he should not overstep his authority. While leaving, she orders her servant to prepare her bag. She intends to have a private meeting with His Majesty. They will be leaving the following day. Nighttime approaches quickly. Evelyn stands awake, her mind lingering on Gileath Black's words. Her daughter is also present, while she continuously mumbles. The little one approaches slowly, unaware of her mom's situation. Frustrated, Evelyn demands to know who is disturbing her. She panics when she realizes it's her daughter. Understanding her mistake, she quickly apologizes, hoping her daughter won't cry. After some time, she relaxes when Sherry falls asleep. Looking at her daughter, she feels reassured. After all, she is the head of the family, and no one can take that from her. After some time passes, the little one slowly opens her eyes. Seeing her mom sleeping, she decides to get some warm sheets to cover her mother. And like that, she leaves silently. Later, someone approaches. Our boy, with an unsure look on his face, holding a bowl in his hand. Evelyn, still asleep, continuously mutters her husband's name. Gileath clearly has something on his mind. but proceeds to wake her up. A bit surprised to see him, he notes she hasn't eaten anything all day. He can't have her fainting from hunger, so he offers her food. However, she remains stubborn like your Wi-Fi when you desperately need it. Suddenly, she gets caught by surprise as his hand wanders to her face. He thinks she is ill, asking if that's the reason she doesn't have an appetite. Immediately, she slaps his hand away, demanding to know what he was planning. In response, he knows she has a habit of not eating when she is ill, leading her to ask if this was his way of getting revenge. Honestly, that wasn't the case, because revenge is more meaningful when opponents are on equal footing. In other words, she's not worth considering as an opponent since she is practically so weak. This causes her to push him away. Annoyed, he grabs her by the neck. Irritated, she demands he let go immediately. However, he narrows his eyes and suggests she do it herself if she has the strength. At first, he thought of her arrogance stems from the royal family and believed she was strong, but he was mistaken. Anyway, he lets go, realizing she knocked off the spoon. So now she has to eat without one. She is bewildered as to why this is happening. However, Gilead Black, now serious, insists she doesn't resist. Well, this causes her to imagine a scene, though it's uncertain if it was a memory, but I guess we will find out. Anyway, he feeds her like a child, warning her not to be stubborn. Also, she needs to get used to what she is fed. Promising such a life isn't bad if she adapts, also it suits her expression. Suddenly, he feels something. Sherry is trying to defend her mom, almost tearing up. He takes this as a sign to leave, but before that, he advises her to stay well. And the little one checks on her mom, while Evelyn reflects on his last words. Meanwhile, we are taken back a decade before. Apparently, due to the rain, Evelyn Hunt was ruined. Black avoided contact when her hand came close to his. She noticed this reaction. After a moment of silence, he suggested getting her something. She immediately stopped him by grabbing his hand, timidly asking if he planned to leave her by herself in the woods, but he insisted that she had caught a cold. However, she could see through his words, noting that he was more feverish than her. Adjusting his hair, she suggested he get a haircut and look her in the eye when speaking. However, he still firmly insisted on getting her something. But she immediately declined, stating it's in order. Well, the scene was way too much for him. With that, she comforted him. And no matter what happens, he will always be hers. Evelyn couldn't forget how innocent his eyes were, completely different from now. We shift to the present day. Her servant anxiously reports that her carriage is unusable. She stares silently, complaining inwardly. Gilead Black, seizing the opportunity, suggests riding with him in his carriage. But she ignores him. Instead, she asks how long it will take to be fixed. Hearing it will take 3 hours, she informs Gilead. In other words, she'll only leave in 3 hours. Gilead Black is somewhat in a hurry. So immediately he carries her princess style, leaving her flustered and shocked, resulting in murmurs from the servants. Furious, she slaps him, demanding he let go. This only annoys the soldiers watching their colonel getting slapped continuously. However, Gilead is unfazed, tossing her into the carriage. He reminds her about her current situation, while she couldn't understand how he changed so much. Later, while on the road, the carriage is filled with silence. Black breaks the awkwardness, expressing relief and bringing her food the other day was the right call. However, she wasn't in the mood to chat. His presence only makes her sick. In response, he apologizes, suggesting she use the empty case in order not to mess up the carriage. This causes her to feel embarrassed. So she kicks the case, wondering how he, who couldn't even afford to look her in the eye, was acting up because of a stupid title of hero. Gilead just stares at her ranting non-stop. As usual, he apologizes. Meanwhile, she doesn't understand how he changed so much. He didn't even react to her provocation. Suddenly, she notices a scar on his head. We are taken back to that very day. We also see things from her point of view. She furiously demanded his leave while she was asking nicely. However, he didn't understand why she was doing this, apologizing like he did something to upset her. This only increased her irritation. as people began to gossip. Looking at him still apologizing and pleading, her irritation reached its peak. With that, she delivered a whack with her whip to his head, causing him to bleed. Back to the present, she reaches for the scar, only to be stopped by an irritated Gileath Black, who seriously asks what she was planning. Coming to her senses, she immediately removes her hand. She comes up with an excuse, asking if that's the reason he grabbed her hand violently, concluding that his master didn't lecture him on how to treat a lady. Honestly, she isn't in the position to say that. Not long after, his subordinate reports they've arrived at their destination. With that, Gileath Black steps out, offering his hand and suggesting they continue their discussion of the past some other time. However, in response, she notes that the memory of him makes her sick. Meanwhile, someone watches her from above, never expecting to see her again. Realizing how time flies. It's been 7 years, yet she remains a radiant beauty. The guy grows more interested, thinking the time has come. Just so we know, his name is Victor Alteric, the second in line to be king and the brother to his majesty. Later, Gileath escorted Evelyn to see the king. On the way, Victor Alteric approached them. Both greeted him warmly and formally, and he responded playfully. Then, casually crossing his arm over Evelyn, he remarked that it had been a long journey and must have been taxing, so he invited her for some warm tea. In response, she politely declined, prioritizing her visit to the king first. Victor wasn't annoyed by this. He then reported that his brother's chronic illness had been worsening. Still trying to salvage what's left, he attempted to persuade her. Evelyn sensed a plot from his expression. Regardless, she adjusted her own expression and politely thanked him for his deep concern. She really knows how to play the game. So, Victor immediately switched the topic to Gileath Black, who was just minding his own business. He mentioned Gileath's duties in hunting down treasonous nobles, saying he was so persistent that himself had to wash his hands of him. He then wondered if they were acquainted. Noticing her silence, he quickly seized the opportunity to introduce Gileath Black as the war hero and his hero, who saved him during the war, he even going to great lengths to persuade him to join the army. He knows Black still kept some of his old habits from when he was a mercenary, and hoped he hadn't bothered her on the way. This came as a surprise to Evelyn. She didn't expect our boy to have once been a mercenary. So, she praised his personality. Don't know if it was sarcasm, but she complimented both of them, saying Alteric would have a great future with such promising men. Just then, a servant arrived to inform her it was time to see the king. However, before she left, Victor, still playing the concerned act, assured her that they could talk about anything, and that there was no shame in seeking help. Honestly, it was kind of funny how his hand kept wandering around. He offered that it was best to erase the worries of the past. This caused Evelyn to shoot him a glare and ask if that's the reason he killed her husband. Victor froze, showing a shocked expression. But she immediately shifted her tone, noting that it was just a joke. Poor guy just stood there, realizing he lost the round. Later, inside the king's bedroom, he called for her. Indeed, his illness had gotten so bad that his skin had begun to decay. Nonetheless, as a sign of respect and courtesy, she kissed his hand. Evelyn warmly apologized for not visiting sooner. Elsewhere, the sound of glass shattering could be heard. Victor was literally pissed about what happened earlier, mumbling complaints about Evelyn's annoying attitude. This was a stark contrast to Gileath Black, who was calmly sipping his wine. Meanwhile, Victor kept mumbling that he suspected her confidence came from someone backing her. He reflected, believing that Lowen Winter, Evelyn's husband, was still alive. We then shift to the private me. He spoke about her husband's funeral, noting how young and remarkable he was, fit to be the next leader of the nation. In contrast, Victor was too ambitious. To his brother, Lowen was nothing more than a nuisance he lost first place to at the Imperial Academy. The king was also certain that Evelyn's current predicament was Victor's doing, all to control her. So he advised her not to face Victor directly, because she can't defeat him head-on. But there was still hope for her. And just before he could say more, we shift back to Victor and Gileath Black. Victor wanted him to find Loan at any cost, reminding him who brought him to his current status. When he suggested handing Black a portrait to memorize, Gileath declined, insisting he already knew what Loan looked like. Victor was surprised. He never imagined they had met, and demanded an answer. Gileath Black confirmed he knew him, without further explanation. This made Victor even more curious, noting how interesting he was with every conversation. The truth is, Gileath had seen Loan's portrait countless times. Because back then, he was the one who painted the wedding portrait of his crush and her husband. Man, imagine the pain this guy must have felt. Back to the present, Evelyn concluded her meeting with the king, making a pledge. At the same time, Gileath Black swore to find him. As did Evelyn. It seems both now share the same objective, or so it seems. Later, it was time to depart. As expected, Victor showed up, casually asking why the long face, clearly sensing that the meeting hadn't gone well. Just then, the butler announced the king's order. Evelyn was to be escorted to her estate. But there was a problem. She hadn't brought her carriage. Without hesitation, Victor offered to take her instead. She stared at him silently, clearly calculating something. Then, she laid it all out. Victor Alteric, born of a late king's concubine, had risen through the military ranks. And his title of Grand Duke wasn't enough. His ambition pointed straight to the throne. And while he had the power, claiming it required more than strength, it demanded bloodline and noble support. That's where the House of Winter came in. Evelyn saw through it all. Victor's plan to use her family name to legitimize his claim. Without blinking, she refused. Unwilling to accept her answer, he grabbed her hand. With a dark glint in his eyes, he warned, this would be the last time he showed kindness. Suddenly, a loud voice shattered the tension. It was Joshua, Victor's direct nephew, and his rival for the crown. He demanded to know why his uncle needed such a large presence just to speak with a lady. Victor was stunned. Joshua should have been at the Imperial Academy. But the prince brushed it off. His location wasn't up for debate. Instead, he turned his attention to Evelyn, greeting her warmly. She returned the greeting with grace, honored that the prince recognized her. Joshua, clearly flustered, stumbled over his words. Victor tried to dismiss him, suggesting adults should handle adult matters. But Evelyn disagreed. After all, Joshua was the Academy's top scorer, a source of pride for the family. Still blushing, Joshua admitted he'd been inspired by her late husband. At the mention of her husband, her mood shifted. With a soft tone, she asked for a favor, a carriage to take her home, explaining hers had been attacked by wolves. Victor's lip twitched at the pitiful sight. Joshua hesitated, unsure. But Evelyn knew how to play the game. Her act pushed him to act. Blushing, he quickly ordered his carriage to be prepared. Whispers rippled through the crowd. One of Gileath's men was impressed. Evelyn had flipped the script, beating Victor at his own game and winning the prince's favor in one move. Victor could only watch as she left, tossing in a snide remark about her manipulating his naive nephew. But she fired back with a line that made him stop in his tracks. Still, he walked away vowing she would regret this day. Later, outside, Gileath approached her. He offered to escort her personally, referencing her earlier mention of wolves. That's when she clarified those wolves weren't beasts. They were him and his men. She declined his offer. As she turned to board the carriage, she realized the step was too high. Gileath immediately understood and offered his hand. Surprised, she questioned his intentions. Calmly, he replied, no hidden motive, just basic decency. Though hesitant, she accepted. He wished her good health. She called him out for pretending to care. Maybe it did sound strange, but he was genuinely glad to see her doing well. Slightly embarrassed, she warned him, never show your face again. And with that, she departed. His men couldn't help but notice. He seemed different, lighter, almost happy. To explain it, Gileath shared a memory. Back then, Evelyn once said, the beauty of the hunt is when the prey stops running and turns to face the hunter. That's what this moment was. She had something to lose, her child, her name, her pride. And that made revenge taste even sweeter. For that, he thanked her. For showing what love truly is. Pointless, painful. With a grim expression, he swore, everything will be returned. In the next scene, we shift to a snowy region. Isaac asks Evelyn if she seriously intends to fix the railway. She reflects on this, her gaze lingering on the project before her. We learn about the project. Its purpose is to replace the unreliable sea route with a railway to Brighton Mine, as the region experiences continuous snowfall. This grand endeavor was originally led by her husband to expand the country's trade, and at the time, it was a massive success. However, due to the serious threat posed by Alteric forces, a devastating explosion caused by a neighboring country halted the project entirely. Now, Isaac considers these factors, advising Evelyn to reconsider whether the threat level is still too great or whether the entire design itself needs revision. Despite his concerns, Evelyn stands firm, convinced that the design is flawless. She also recalls her meeting with the king the previous week. In summary, the king needs her to support his son and solidify his stance. She agrees to take responsibility and promises to lead the Brighton project to success, to fulfill the long-cherished dream of both houses. Back in the present, she stresses the urgency of the project. At that moment, Gileath appears. He explains that the region is a civil project and that she needs a permit to proceed with operations. Evelyn scoffs at this nonsense, pointing out that they are the ones trespassing on her property. In response, he feigns ignorance. So, she properly informs him that the project is entrusted to her by the king himself. Spotting a few inconsistencies in the blueprints, she orders Isaac to revise them. With a respectful nod, he quietly exits. Understanding the situation, Gileath signals his subordinates to withdraw. Left alone, he suggests Evelyn proceed with her duties. Meanwhile, she sees his real intention. She understands that this is part of Victor's plot. She and Victor have stood on opposite sides ever since the incident with his nephew. Momentarily distracted, she snaps back to reality, refocusing on the task at hand, finishing her husband's project. She vividly recalls her conversation with her husband, who emphasized that the project was meant to strengthen the nation through international trade rather than keeping it confined to a single port. And now, in this dark time, the project will surely bring light. But as she loses herself in those memories, danger creeps in unnoticed. A loose metal pillar begins to fall from above. Luckily, Gileath senses it in time. He calls for her attention. But she is too stunned to react. Fortunately, he prevents what could have been a catastrophe. However, in the process of saving her, her foot gets soaked in the freezing seawater. Acting fast, Gileath tells her to remove her shoe to prevent frostbite. Finally coming to her senses, she immediately slaps his hand away, warning him never to touch her. Honestly, did she forget that he just saved her life? Even so, Gileath remains calm. He warns her again. Her stubbornness might cost her a foot. Still, she refuses, throwing in a jab, wondering if his ears are just for decoration. Meanwhile, a snowstorm begins to approach. Without hesitation, he grabs her, ordering her to follow him. She can only express her irritation in silence. But Gileath is the least bit concerned. A wooden cottage soon comes into view. Evelyn is instantly bewildered. The building sparks some intimate memories, though it's hard to say for sure. Inside, the silence stretches between them. Gileath simply says they'll wait out the storm. She says nothing, just stares at him. A storm outside, and perhaps one within her as well. Meanwhile, Gileath plans to start a fire. He casually remarks on how the place hasn't changed. But for Evelyn, the place is a void. Everything about it long erased from her memory. His eyes narrow slightly, curious at her reaction. As he starts the fire, he insists that she dry her wet clothes. She doesn't move. Instead, she questions why he seems so indifferent, so unaffected by everything. In response, he reminds her that he is a soldier. Feelings don't serve much purpose where he comes from. Evelyn laughs softly, noting that the boy who once couldn't handle a chisel properly is now a soldier. He wipes his face with her damp hair, a bold move. And with a strange softness, he says it was all thanks to her, that day. She is stunned for a moment, but quickly regains her composure and insists he leave, as usual. However, Gileath informs her that no one knows about her location. If he leaves, she could die. She pouts, believing that would make Victor extremely happy. But Gileath disagrees. On the contrary, his master would be deeply upset. Outside, the storm shows no signs of letting up. He suddenly asks if she remembers the old days. She feels embarrassed. Those days are gone, there's no going back. Curious, she asks what he means. Instead of answering directly, he questions whether she truly loves her husband, Loan. Before she can answer, he adds another, asking if she can handle the project alone. Does Loan really love her? Also, is he the kind of man who would put the woman he loves at risk? Continuously questioning deeply enrages and irritates her. From the way Gileath speaks, it seems Loan is alive. Evelyn also questions his loyalty to the Grand Duke. After all, he is a war hero, so he should be in the palace. Yet here he is, playing the role of a mere bodyguard. Reflecting, she suspects that the issue lies in his humble status as a commoner. The Grand Duke doesn't trust him. Seeing no reaction, she presses further, wondering if he ever worries about being abandoned or if it's simply in his nature to follow orders blindly. He acknowledges that it is his master's habit to mistrust and trample on others. Evelyn laughs at this. Then, circling back to his question, she affirms that she loved Loan. She suddenly grabs Gileath by his tie, her expression serious. She wonders if it was difficult for him to accept. But Gileath doesn't respond. Instead, his gaze shifts toward the bed, reminding her of what happened that day. Now serious, he asks if she truly wore a white dress on her wedding day, if she truly stood before God in purity. Seeing no response, he presses further, asking if she truly lied in front of God and everyone. Having heard enough, she slaps him. Unshaken, he murmurs that with such lies, she may never make it to heaven. She slaps him again. Even harder. Evelyn demands to know what he is trying to achieve by bringing up the past. In response, he catches her off guard by touching her lips. Suddenly, the storm shakes the house. And now, she finds herself on top of him. He teasingly asks what her husband might say if he learned about this. Strangely amused, she tries to end the encounter, insisting that he asked himself after death. Yet Gileath doesn't resist. Instead, he apologizes. He notes that this isn't his time as he reaches into his coat. Pulling out a weapon, he declares that someone like him has no business interfering in the affairs of two noble lovers. Evelyn is stunned. The gun is pointed at her. The scene opens with the completion of Evelyn's wedding portrait. Grief weighs heavily on Gileath, pushing him to the brink of despair. Overcome with sorrow, he is moments away from ending his own life, but Evelyn intervenes just in time. She makes it clear that he does not have her permission to leave without her consent. As he processes her words, she suddenly grabs him by the collar and kisses him, leaving him utterly stunned. That night, they share an intimate moment together. By morning, she beat him. And that was the moment he made his decision. If he wanted revenge, he had to live. Later, during the war, he manages to save Victor, who weakly thanks him. But something feels off. He doesn't recall seeing him among the army ranks. Naturally, he asks for his name. Gileath hesitates for a moment, recalling when Evelyn once gave him a name. Taking a breath, he responds in a firm tone. Victor studies him, noting that his name carries the weight of abandonment. Back in the present, Gileath holds Evelyn at gunpoint. One of his men is startled by the sudden gunshot, scanning the distance anxiously. To their relief, it turns out to be a signal. One soldier panics, suggesting they report to headquarters immediately. Another instructs him to stay calm. As he walks toward the signal, he orders the other one to prepare the carriage. Meanwhile, at the Winter estate, the telephone rings. A female butler answers, informing the caller that the head of the estate is unavailable. However, confusion sets in when she fails to understand what the caller means by a gift. Just then, the door slams open. The caller is revealed to be Victor, who chuckles at the perfect timing. He knows exactly what it means. His gift has arrived. A moment later, Isaac appears, looking as though he barely survived a battle. He reports that masked figures attacked, the project design was stolen, and most concerning of all, Evelyn is now completely alone. As if that weren't enough, they receive a message from the Grand Duke, catching them off guard. Before they can read its contents, the scene shifts back to Evelyn, who stands frozen in shock. Gileath had fired a flare gun. Right on cue, his subordinates arrive to retrieve their colonel. Turning to Evelyn, still stunned, he offers to escort her back to her estate. She sneers at his offer, remarking that he has missed his opportunity and that it is a shame they will never see each other again. Yet, he never intended to kill her. What surprises him most is that she doesn't know about the news. Back at the Winter Estate, moments before the message arrived, during a conversation with the Grand Duke, Victor Alteric makes a remark. Evelyn has no friends and lacks any real social interaction. Regardless, he has purchased the land directly across from her estate. In other words, his gift is an invitation to the welcoming ball, or that's what I think. And as for the owner of that newly acquired estate, the new lord, none other than our protagonist himself. Evelyn is shocked, wondering aloud if the Grand Duke truly granted him the domain. In case it wasn't clear, whether you hear him addressed as Lord Black or Gileath in the future, they are one and the same. Nonetheless, Lord Black extends an invitation to Evelyn to attend his celebratory ball in 2 weeks. And it is worth noting, this is not a request from the Grand Duke. He watches her with that smug look, as if he has figured everything out. Meanwhile, Evelyn is already looking forward to it. Upon arriving at her estate, Evelyn is met by one of her butlers, hurrying toward her with urgent news about the Grand Duke's message. However, upon seeing Lord Black at her side, his striking presence up close, both of the maids instantly blush, their cheeks turning a deep shade of red. Evelyn thanks Lord Black and suggests he leave quickly. He nods in affirmation without saying much and departs. Only after he is gone do the ladies gather around their mistress, curiosity and concern evident in their expressions. However, Evelyn merely asks for her personal butler, Isaac. The man approaches, apologizing profusely. She can tell he has been through a great deal. Without a word, she leaves, ordering them to prepare a bath for her and to fetch a doctor, or rather, someone named Oscar. Later, inside her bath, scented with rose petals, Evelyn leans back, lost in thought. Her mind lingers on her conversation with Lord Black about his upcoming ball. Truthfully, she doesn't understand his intentions. Why would the Grand Duke suddenly purchase the estate across from hers now, rather than doing so long ago? After a moment of reflection, she concludes, it is simply one of his schemes to bring her down. The Grand Duke was truly a force to be reckoned with. She also remembers her late husband, his voice, his predictions. He foresaw the brutal battle for the throne that would follow the king's illness and the immense pressure their family would face. His words felt like a farewell, admitting with regret that he had no friends, something he had come to consider a shame. And now, Evelyn realizes with chilling clarity, she is surrounded only by enemies. Even her servants are visibly anxious. The realization sinks deep. She has no one to turn to. Lost in thought, she feels a small hand reaching out to her. Startled, she turns, only to find Sherry, her daughter, eyes filled with tears. Concerned, Evelyn asks how she got in and why she is crying. But before she can get an answer, the little girl slips, falling straight. Panic surges through Evelyn. Quickly, she pulls her daughter out, scolding her loudly for her carelessness. Midway through her reprimand, she suddenly freezes. She realizes the child was only worried about her. Overcome by emotion, she embraces Sherry tightly, holding her close. She whispers assurances, murmuring everything will be fine. As Evelyn dresses Sherry in fresh clothes, the sound of a loud argument echoes through the halls. Without warning, a young man bursts into the room, claiming to be a doctor. His eyes scan her frantically, asking if she was fine. Evelyn exhales, exasperated. Of all people, it had to be him. Still concerned, he approaches, rummaging through his coat pockets as he prepares to examine her. He pulls out a stethoscope. Frankly, Evelyn begins to question whether he is a real doctor. She promptly slaps some sense into him. She remarks dryly, wondering if all doctors act the same way. Despite his nose bleeding from the slap, Oscar grins, holding up a reassuring thumbs up. He comments on how much she hasn't changed over the past 10 years. In response, she sighs and tells him to drop the awkward formalities. And just like that, the conversation shifts to nostalgia, laughing, reminiscing, strolling through the halls as they discuss the old days. Meanwhile, a masked man watches from the shadows. Observing the scene before him, he realizes things are about to get much more interesting.